Hi, I'm Patricia Hesnan. Welcome to our podcast. With me today is Aine Farrell. Aine is a neurodevelopmental therapist. We will be discussing behaviour issues with children which may be affecting them in their home or school. And I'll hand you over to Aine.
Thank you, Patricia. Well, I have over 30 years experience working with young children because I am a primary teacher and I have a master's in education. I run a clinic called Developmental Foundations for Learning, where I work as a neurodevelopmental therapist. I'm also a Johansson auditory integration therapist, a bioenergy therapist, and I have qualifications in working with children with sensory processing disorders as well. So overall, I cover quite a gambit of issues which children may present with.
What is neurodevelopmental therapy?
Neurodevelopmental therapy actually focuses on something called primitive reflexes. So it's a movement-based therapy where we put the children on exercises to fill in gaps in their development, so to fill in where they may not have gone through the proper movement, the proper exercises in early childhood. So it is a movement-based therapy to integrate all the reflexes and in so doing to promote the development of coordination, of concentration and attention, and of learning skills. So I would get up early in the mornings and do the breakfast for the whole family, let's say. You know, I would be one step ahead of my mother all the time trying to help her. So in the home, I was the best little girl you could have. But send me to school and I was overwhelmed. The whole classroom buzz overwhelmed me. I was fine with my peers. I was lucky that I did have friends, but I was bright and was able to move around that. But some kids find that actually surviving life is taking all their energy and they haven't time for forming friendships or learning the necessary social skills which would make them part of the group and give them a sense of belonging. So they can end up isolated as a result of having primitive reflexes, survival reflexes, still alive and well and kicking in their system.
And what exactly then this is how it affected you, but what to people out there, what are primitive reflexes? What exactly does it mean?
Primitive reflexes are the reflexes that we were all born with. They're the reflexes that a child needs to get themselves from being that helpless little baba in the cot to becoming a little person who can walk around and babble. So these reflexes are needed in the first year of life for the child to move through all the necessary movement patterns and roll along from, very important within the services, but not a lot of help to me as a neurodevelopmental therapist. I'm simply looking at retained primitive reflexes.
And I see another one here, the Moro reflex.
Well, you've really picked the biggest reflex of them all there, the Moro. That is the one that is associated with fight-flight. You can have the child who has high fight, flight, freeze, who is the absolute perfectionist and will go mad if things are not perfect. And those children can often get an autism diagnosis. They can fixate on things, they like perfection, or they can be the absolute fight child who doesn't care and just throws everything around the place, has meltdowns, kicks out, lashes, screams. And there are various degrees of each of those children. They can be the freeze child, the child who mom or dad does the reading, the spelling with at home, and then they go into school and they haven't a clue. You know, and there's so many children like that. They look at the page and everything just disappears. And yet they knew it at home in the relaxed situation the night before. So that's just a description of some of the children who would have a high Moro reflex. The range is wide. If you had a high Moro reflex and I had a high Moro reflex, it might express itself differently in your body to mine. And I know exactly what it's like to have one because I was that child. I mean, bang the door and I would have hopped up off the chair in fright, just like that little baby in the cot who screams when the door is banged, turns red, you know, and flails their limbs. You know, so it's not an easy one.
We'll say some children I would have had for therapy now, they would say, the parents say, they don't appear to be able to empathise. You know, when they do something that the parent is annoyed about, they don't seem to be able to connect with the parent being annoyed about it. It's like, I've done it, get on with it. They don't seem to be able to empathise with how it's affecting their peers or their parents.
And those children, again, Patricia, often get a diagnosis of some form of autism. If you are overwhelmed in life, if it's taking every ounce of energy for you just to survive and go from day to day, you really don't have a lot left for other people, and you won't empathise. And we do find that, well, I find in my practice that as I work the child through the programme and as the reflexes come down, as the child moves forward into a more voluntary movement stage, that they actually begin to empathise. And that these skills develop. They're just delayed in terms of developing them. And delayed is a word we use a lot in neurodevelopmental therapy, because we don't call them children with Aspergers or dyslexia or dyspraxia. We just say the child has the umbrella term being neurodevelopmental delay. So a lot of these children will go ahead, live normal lives, take up jobs, drive their car, have their friends, but childhood has just been a struggle. So why let it be a struggle when we can help them?
Exactly. And what kind of tests can be carried out to see if a child would actually benefit from
Well, if a child
therapy?
is experiencing difficulties and they come to me, the first thing I have to do is check, have they actually got retained primitive reflexes? So I put them through a series of tests, movement tests. So I'm watching the movement of their limbs, the little flicker in the muscles. I'm watching them crossing the midline or not crossing the midline. I'm watching their visual tracking. I'm monitoring their focus.
And your visual tracking is do you have something moving?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
To see, can their eyes follow it without moving their body? To see, are they able to cross the midline without the eyes giving a little jump? To see, can they track from top to bottom? A skill so necessary if you're copying from a board. We check their eyes, we check their balance, we check all their movements. And because I work with sensory as well, I also do some standardized testing on their sensory profile to find out, what are they oversensitive to? What are they undersensitive to?
And now are you talking about their sensory profile? You're not talking about foods. You're talking about
No.
Okay.
Although it might come into it, it does come into it, because remember, we have the sense of smell and the sense of taste. So I would be checking, you will have children who will eat nothing but white foods. And people will say this is an autistic trait, and it is an autistic trait. But sometimes when you bring down their primitive reflexes, they will widen their food dietary range. But I'm concerned not just with what they eat and what they taste. I'm concerned with their auditory, what they're hearing. Are they oversensitive to sounds, or are they undersensitive? Are they able to focus in on one voice and filter or not? I'm concerned with their visual. How are their eyes working? Are they concerned, not just what can they see, but how are the eyes tracking? Are they crossing the midline? I'm concerned with their sensitivity to light, their undersensitivity. I'm concerned with their muscle sense. Like, do they feel pain? Are they undersensitive to pain and discomfort, or oversensitive? I want to know about their balance system. So are they oversensitive to movement? Like, are they afraid to go on a swing or a slide? Or are they undersensitive, that they're the real roller coaster kid, who has no sense of danger? So when I do a sensory profile, I end up with a picture of the child in terms of what they're undersensitive to and oversensitive to, in terms of the 5 senses that we're very aware of, but also a muscle sense and a balance sense, and a sense of where they are in the world, and their sense of pain, etc. All of this touch stuff, which isn't just what I feel, it's what I am feeling.
Yes.
So, you have children, so many of the kids who come to me are sensitive to labels, let's say. And they need the labels cut off their clothes. They're sensitive to the seams in their socks. Now, this was a big one in my house with my daughter. She was very sensitive. She couldn't wear a pair of socks, unless they were very fresh and very new and the seams had not gone hard in the wash.
Okay.
And that's a classic story most parents tell me when they come in.
Okay. And the other thing is, Anya, we'll say a child then that is not sensitive enough to pain, and where you feel sometimes in therapy where a child will self-harm, and their emotional pain is at such a high level, do you find a tendency when they get into the early teenage years, there is that little tendency to self-harm, because if they can't feel the emotional pain, they inflict the physical pain so that at least they feel, I'm here.
You see, this is it. You can look at it from so many perspectives, but if you are undersensitive to touch, and let's say as a young child their shoes could be put on the wrong feet and they wouldn't feel the discomfort, it may happen later that in order to just sense where they are, they have to slap, touch, hit in order to sense, I am here, this is my body space, this is the space that I occupy in the world. And sadly it does go to self-harm sometimes, but we actually do that with the children, that they will slap their body early on as a tapping exercise to relieve themselves emotionally, and also just to know where I am and this is my space. So many kids, if you tell them to tap their bum, they don't even know how to slap their own bum because they're not aware of where their back space is. So to scratch your own back, to rub your own back, to touch the back of your calves, the back of your ankles, the back of your thighs. And we do all that work so that in the early years, hopefully we're troubleshooting and we won't have issues in their teens.
And isn't it interesting the expressions we have? I had to pinch myself to bring me back here. You know, we do it
it's so
as
true,
adults.
but there's wisdom in it.
Yes, I had to pinch myself. And what is, I see there's another test here, and it's an audiological test. Is that what you call it?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, you see, when I started out as a neurodevelopmental therapist, and I actually felt quite limited. I felt I needed to get in there, into the child's system, to integrate the senses and to balance out things, to get this child back into synchrony. And sometimes it wasn't through exercises and movement. I needed something more. So one of the other strong ways to get in, rather than through the muscle sense, is through the auditory. So I qualified as a Johansson auditory integration therapist years ago. So that's a form of auditory therapy based on Tomatis, let's say, and other auditory therapists, but refined by Johansson in Denmark and then disseminated from there. I find it's very easy and home friendly. The child listens to a CD for 10 minutes every night. The CD is customized, and in so doing it stimulates part of their auditory graph which may need development. And in so doing, that, because the auditory system is so connected into the emotional system, helps the child to balance their life.
Oh, very good. And is the 10-minute CD is customized, and then is there a follow-up that is also based on the progress the child is making?
Well, each time the child comes to me, I take an audiogram. So they put the headphones on and I press the button and they listen to the sounds, and I register at what frequency they heard the sound or they didn't. So I end up with a graph of that child's individual auditory processing. I also have the normal curve, so I put that against that, and then I post all of that off to HQ, as they say, and there are technicians there who are able to look at that, customise the CD and post that back to me.
Good.
Then I give it to the parents who work with that for 6 to 8 weeks.
Great. What will happen in the case where a child may have a hearing difficulty, or there may be a problem with one ear or the other?
Well, in those cases, we just actually work away as normal. They're hearing it or they're not, and they may need stimulation. So if they're not hearing it, we still stimulate because it may bring it in. So basically, I will write on the graph, didn't hear such and such at whatever frequency. And when I send that off, that is worked with by the technicians and the experts. And they send me back the exact disc that is customised for that child. But if a child has a hearing issue, I may have to say that auditory may be limited in terms of the benefits it will give. It will still give some benefits, but now let's work with that child through the neurodevelopmental therapy or the bioenergies. And there are many other ways to work with that system. Neurodevelopmental therapy, Johansson, they're all but one way of getting in there. And with that child, really I wouldn't be choosing the auditory therapy as my first therapy.
Okay,
But suppose that child was very oppositional and wouldn't do an exercise for the parent. Then I would try bioenergies, or I would try using Johansson, or I would try some other sensory approach.
Okay, that's good. Now, what is the role of the parents in all of this, Anya? How do the parents become involved? What we'll say a parent decides they're going to take their child to you for therapy. What role do they have to play, or is their role important, or is it?
Well, I'm going to say it very slowly. The parent is the key.
Okay.
And that is it. I work very similar to an occupational therapist, except I send work home with the parent to be done every single day. It's only 5 minutes. It may only be exercise. If it's a CD, it's 10 minutes. The child can lie there and listen to it. But the parent is the key. I am empowering the parent to do something. They're not depending on me to do everything. I'm simply like the conductor in the orchestra. I say what to do and how long to do it for. But the parent is the person who must do the exercise. So the parent's ability to do something consistently and to apply themselves consistently every single day, 365 days of the year, for the 18 months that this program lasts, that's what the success of the program is based on, because it is a developmental program. And development is slow and certain and drip. So this doesn't suit every single parent. The parent has to ask themselves, am I prepared to make this commitment?
And we'll say the parent then, how often would the parent have to bring the child for therapy? Is a weekly appointment, or it's over, you say, over an 18-month span?
Again, that's the difference between occupational therapy and a practice like mine, which is neurodevelopmental therapy based. I would only see them every 6 to 8 weeks. Okay. They may phone me. We tune in, regularly on the progress of the child. But I would set the parent up on a program, and it's up to the parent to implement that program to the letter of the law between visits. But I would only see them every 6 to 8, which makes it very cost efficient.
Yes, absolutely.
It is not an expensive way of doing things.
Yes.
People are sometimes scared of going privately, and they say, oh, I'll have to remortgage the house to do this.
Absolutely.
But no, it's not actually overly expensive because it's only every 6 to 8 weeks. And as opposed to me sitting and working with the child for an hour every single week, the child is actually getting way more in a way that is more conducive to permanent change, because true development brings permanent change than if I just worked for an hour once a week.
Exactly. And then the child is going through the process of the change in their own environment, rather than adapting to your environment.
Well, yes, absolutely. But the parent is the key.
Right.
And so many parents feel helpless when their child has problems, and all they get is reports and descriptions. The child is this, the child is that, the child can do this, the child can't do that. We are just empowering the parent to help the child, and they will see change. Sometimes parents come to me and they say, I'd love if my child was better at reading or writing. And what happens? The child starts the movement program and ends up being more comfortable maybe in their own skin, becoming more affectionate initially before other changes come in. Remember one mom saying to me, I don't care if he never reads, she said now. He hugs me. He never hugged me before. And in spite of all my questioning, I hadn't hit on that this little boy never used to hug his mammy.
Right.
And all his mammy cared about now was that he hugged her.
Right.
And she wasn't a bit concerned about the reading and the writing, which all came eventually. But, this is a little boy. And I remember her saying that, and I thought, wow, what a shift in the space she was in.
Yes.
This little man now hugged her. Whereas he was so tactile defensive that he hated being hugged.
And there's a recommended age that a child would start, and that's up to 5.
For neurodevelopmental therapy, I would say 5. But if a parent knows there's a problem with a child before that, or realises my child didn't crawl, my child isn't speaking, my child didn't walk until 24 months, or maybe walked at 9 months or whatever, those parents can still do a lot with the child. I mean, there's bioenergy work, there's a lot of sensory work that can be done in terms of working out and protecting the child from things that insult the child's system, basically, or feeding the child with what the child needs. The child may need a lot of rubbing, deep tissue massage. Child may need, you know, maybe some work done around the mouth or the face to work with the suck and the root reflex, which is all very simple touch work for a parent to do. Child may need what's called vestibular stimulation, which is like spinning and swinging. You know, child may need to lie more on its tummy. Child may need to do little core exercises, which can be worked into games at home.
Yes.
And, you know, I would be skilled to do all of that. But for your traditional step 1, step 2, step 3 program in neurodevelopmental therapy, really we wouldn't be starting until the child is 5.
Okay. Then we'll take a parent now who may be listening to this podcast and say, well, my 3.5-year-old is showing symptoms of all of these things at the moment, and what could you query there? Could you query, say, birth trauma, pre-birth trauma?
Yes.
It may not necessarily be any of the factors of the primitive reflex.
Well, in a case like that, we always take a history. In all cases, we take a history. A developmental history, a birth history, going right back to conception.
Yes.
So we're checking out, is this an IVF baby? What were the circumstances of conception? Describe the pregnancy, and we'd have pregnancy-related questions. Moving through the birth, moving through into the early years, it may be that maybe the birth was very traumatic and this child may actually be not just delayed but compromised in that there may actually be brain damage because of something. And in cases like that, if that's what I suspect, I refer on to a paediatrician.
Okay.
Can I help that child? Yes. But if the child is brain damaged, can NDT fix that? It can help the child because neurodevelopmental therapy is based on the plasticity of the brain, that we can actually heal quite a lot. I wouldn't be in a position to say how much it can heal the child, but we would work as hard as we could with a committed parent, and we would make the best progress possible with that child.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be making promises, Patricia, of anything in particular. We would just work and celebrate every improvement we get if I suspected the child was carrying some form of brain damage.
Okay.
If I didn't suspect brain damage, there's plenty we can do with the child.
Well, this is where we go back to, we'll say, where the mother may have experienced a shock or a trauma or a bereavement during her pregnancy, and the child has gone into the fight or flight or contracted from the shock, and we'll say, where we would have ourselves have applied the bioenergy then to decrease the intensity of the shock or trauma, so that the child would open up its potential. So if a parent could at least do a little bit themselves, if they cannot get, how many neurodevelopmental therapists are there worldwide? And so if the parents can do something themselves, or if they've got an insight into, I remember that day I was at work and this car behind me ran into the back of the car. I was 6 months pregnant. There's quite possibly a lot of shock in the child's system also. So it's to look at other, not just bioenergy, other therapies that can decrease that level. And then the child, by the time, if the child is still displaying primitive reflexes, by the time they get to you, well, at least you're on an easier road to make improvement.
If somebody has done some work with bioenergies prior to putting them on the exercises, it's of extreme benefit. In fact, there's nothing to stop them doing both at the same time.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm going to hold on to one word you said, and that was potential. By doing this work, we are releasing the child's potential. And in America, one of the major groups who work with neurodevelopmental therapy call it themselves Neurodevelopmental Therapy, Releasing Potential Through Movement.
Oh, beautiful.
And that's the title they use, Releasing Potential Through Movement. And I love that title because you're basically hoping that the child will be the best that they could be. But in the early years, bioenergy is the way to go, and working with the pressure points as well, and
Yes.
integrating various therapies there. And in fact, from the parent's perspective, to bring them to an awareness in themselves of accepting that there may have been a trauma shared by parent and child,
Yes,
and that the parent themselves gets the bioenergy. Child is very connected into parent, and sometimes we can help the child by simply helping the parent. And sometimes starting with the parent is the best place.
Yes.
So this is not just about the child, it's about parents and child.
child,
Parents in that helping dad may be the way to go. Because, you know, sometimes we focus so much on mom, but we must remember there are two parents there and the child is energetically connected to both.
Yes. And as you're saying, Anya, some children seem to be more susceptible, as in children that go into care or into orphanages at an early age, are isolated, and they maintain their primitive reflexes.
Yes.
Because there was no crossover, or there was no safe place to cross
that's right.
over into childhood reflexes.
If you have a little child, you know, who is born into a situation, you know, where they are unwanted and they're put in an orphanage. So let's take the children who were adopted in from China or in from Russia or whatever. One finds that if they spent a long time in an orphanage where they were sensory deprived, that they didn't get an opportunity to integrate their reflexes. So really a lot of those children need neurodevelopmental therapy. Similarly, if there was a child who was ill in their early months, they may have been hospitalised and may not have gone through the normal processes a baby at home may have gone through. If you had a child maybe who was put in a cast for their hips in the early months, all of those children have gone through a different developmental path and they may not have integrated their reflexes. Like with everything in life, some of us are more able than others to do that. And you could get the child who really still managed in spite of all the obstacles life threw at them.
Yes.
But for the average child who was in an orphanage, who may have attachment issues, who may have been sensory deprived, an NDT program will benefit them.
Okay.
And it's worth investigating and trying. But so also will bioenergies. Those children really do have a need in their system.
Yes.
But what I do is I'm checking for primitive reflexes. If there are no primitive reflexes there, that child is not for me. I have to look at something else.
Yes.
So I may say to the parent, can I work with the child just with bioenergies, and let's leave the exercise program for the moment. You know, so they may come to me for one thing and get another.
Exactly. So it's like, we'll say somebody comes for counselling.
Yes.
Or somebody comes with a back injury for
Yes.
therapy. But the reason the person's back is not improving is because each time they sit into a car, the body is contracting. So the baby then, that has shock in its system, and you're trying to get the child to do exercises, it's thinking, whoops, no way, get tighter and tighter. Whereas you say, use a bit of bioenergy and the system relaxes and you can get in there and release the potential.
Absolutely. And there's a lady who has just done a PhD in that area, Dr. Alwina Awan, and she actually works with the exercise programs plus pressure points and energy work.
Right, okay.
So she feels that it's that whole combination
Yes.
that works.
Yes.
So I would totally agree with her. And in fact,
Yes.
I'm doing her course at the moment, just so that I totally tune into that integrated approach
Yes,
to
yes.
helping a
There's
child.
not one or
We're
the
very
other.
complex beings, really.
Yes,
So if you really want to help a child, the approach must be multifaceted.
Exactly. And have there been clinical trials and research into NDT?
There have, but because it's non-drug based, you don't get the pharmaceutical companies, let's say, doing the big trials. So in recent years, I suppose it really came to the fore in the 70s in England with a centre that was set up in Chester, INPP. the Institute for Neuropsychology and Physiology, and they brought it to the fore on this side of the world. You also had a lady called Mastakova in Russia and in Eastern Europe. You had Blomberg in America. So it seemed to emerge and get pulled together in a lot of parts of the world almost at the same time in the 70s. Since then, we've had a lot of PhDs done in it, and recently quite a few PhDs done in the area. So universities are accepting people with proposals for PhDs, because this does help children. If anything that is going to help children to learn better and, you know, be more emotionally and mentally and physically balanced is worth investigating. So universities are studying it and allowing PhDs to do studies in these areas and therefore produce empirical evidence to support the benefits of the therapies.
Brilliant. And has it been approved by the ASAI, the advertisement board?
Yes,
that's good.
Absolutely.
And
there are quite a few websites out there and a lot of information and a lot of blogs and a lot of online courses available in the area.
Oh, very good. And I think that was very interesting, Aine. And
Thank you, Patricia.
for yourself, how did you feel about talking about that? How was it for you?
Actually, I really enjoyed talking about it, because even as I talked and listened, I felt more enthusiastic about my therapies, and I said, yes, this is wonderful. And sometimes it's like a therapy session. It's not until you hear yourself saying it that you appreciate the absolute value, the integrity, and the strength of what you're saying. So, you know, I'm very happy that I did this interview, because it has helped me pull my thoughts together, and it has helped reaffirm for me the value of what I'm doing.
And thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Looking forward to meeting you on our next podcast. Don't forget to check out our other videos on healingcoursesonline.com.